From the NewsChannel 5 network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm NewsChannel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. When the calendar says it's January, that means the Tennessee General Assembly has begun its work for the new year. After an organizational session last week, Governor Bill Lee called lawmakers into a one-week special session to focus on education issues surrounding the ongoing pandemic. After that, the 112th Tennessee General Assembly will begin its regular session, stretching on into the spring. To give his insights and wisdom on what lies ahead for the legislature this term, we welcome back to Inside Politics the Speaker of the State House of Representatives, Sexton of Crossville. Mr. Speaker, thank you for joining us on the program. Great to have you here.
It's great to be back. Thank you for the opportunity.
Just this special session, you're mostly confined to what the governor has asked you to look at in terms of education, or any bills that are before the legislature already about education, fair game to be considered?
It's subject to his call. There was 5 aspects of his call, so as long as your education bill could fit one of the 5, you can have it heard. Outside of that, it can't be heard.
Now, the estimated learning loss, which is one of the major issues you're looking at, is pretty scary. You had a 50% estimated decrease in student reading at a 3rd grade level, a 65% loss in math skills. Does that mean our efforts for virtual learning in the state have pretty much failed during the pandemic?
We'll have to see. Those are projections based off what they think they're seeing right now. We'll see what those look like. But we do have a problem with learning loss, and we also have a problem just overall with reading and math proficiency in our state. And so part of the learning loss bill is to set up a program for after-school tutoring as well as summer camps that will focus on those subjects in the lower grades.
In his speech to the lawmakers coming up on Tuesday afternoon, the governor all but blamed the learning loss on school systems in the states such as Memphis and Nashville that have been teaching students online where they're back into the classroom due to the pandemic. Do you think the governor's right about that?
Well, those 2 school systems, their scores weren't very good in the first place, so they've been holding us back a little bit as the case has been. So I'm assuming they're going to have a little more additional learning loss. We're concerned about it on a statewide level, but at the end, our goal is to educate people through K through 12 and get them where they can get a good paying job.
Well, should Nashville and Memphis be more or less forced to go back to in-person classes? I mean, there's a bill I think you may be a co-sponsor of that would basically penalize school systems that don't go back to at least, I think, 70 or 80 days worth of in-person classroom instruction this school year, and they take either all or some of the state's funding for the schools away, which would be pretty crippling. Does that also include, by the way, the 4% pay raise the governor is recommending for teachers?
It doesn't affect the pay raise. What I will say is there's 180 days in the calendar year for the kids to be in class. 70 days is only 40%. All we're saying is there needs to be an option for in-person learning in the classroom. An option. It doesn't mean that they all have to be there. You can have a hybrid plan, but there needs to be an option for parents to send their kids.
Along with learning loss, isn't one of the other big problems facing schools and just the struggle to get back and stay in in-person classes? Lots of other systems have gone virtual, at least for a while, before they've gone back. I don't see anything in this call that's dealing with staff shortages or PPE or anything like that. Shouldn't that also be somewhere in the call that's related to education? And certainly it's been a big problem during the pandemic for education.
Well, we haven't heard of the concern from the schools about PPE. The governor, that's a separate thing. They have plenty of PPE if people need it. I don't think that's our problem at this time. You know, a bigger problem we're having with the teachers is only less than 40% want to take the vaccination when it comes out to help teachers. That's going to be a problem, too, as we move forward.
I think you mentioned this before, but even before the pandemic, it was estimated over a third of Tennessee students were not reading at grade level, at the 3rd grade level, by the time they reached the 3rd grade. That's a pretty scary statistic. Again, what is the state already doing to address the crisis so that perhaps it wasn't so bad that we're having to deal with it now that it's even worse?
Well, what I will tell you is when Governor Haslam came into office with Republican majorities 10 years ago, we were only at 27%. And so we have progressed up. We have moved the bar. We're doing a little bit better, not great. That's why we're wanting to implement these things with the governor's approval, the summer camps, with phonics to really try to help us in those areas.
Do you see some help coming from the federal government? The new president, Joe Biden, says he wants to get schools back in session in the classrooms, one of his top priorities, and do so safely. Do you think we'll be getting more money coming from that?
Well, we'll see what he says. It's interesting that you have schools in Davidson County complaining that they can't open, but the president, who's a Democrat, says he wants them to open, and we're asking them to open, and they're criticizing us, but they're not criticizing him. I don't know what their issue is.
Well, since you're bringing up Republicans and Democrats, many Republican elected officials refused to recognize Joe Biden after the November election. Now that he's been certified and duly sworn in, do you recognize him now as the President of the United States, duly elected?
He was sworn in yesterday as President of the United States. He's the 46th president.
Going back to learning, there's a reading program called Reading 360 that I think is part of what you're being asked to approve. What would that entail, and how would that help?
It centers around phonics and teaching it differently than we have been. We've had phonics in the state for a while, but never used in the means that we think would be beneficial to help us. So the 360 program is really trying to utilize our phonics and really give them more resources and tools to be able to implement it in the classroom.
Phonics has always been kind of a controversial issue within education. Sounding out words is what phonics usually means, but some educators think it's better if you teach the meaning of words to children rather than teaching them just how to sound them out. Why are you and the governor embracing phonics at this point?
Well, I think in your scenario, what you're mentioning, there's two trains of thought, and I think you need both of them in the end. But I think you need to start with systemic phonics first. I think that's very beneficial. And then you can move into understanding the meaning of that word to help them on both ends. But I think you have to do phonics first, and I agree with the governor's approach.
Part of one of the bills up there at least has some kind of gate that would be put in to keep students from being passed forward, say beyond the third grade, if they don't read at the third grade level. I think that used to be called social promotion. That's always been controversial in that people talk about they don't like the idea, but it continues to be done. And if it doesn't get done, then parents get upset, students get upset, teachers get upset, school boards get upset. So do you think there's really going to be a commitment by the state to make sure that we don't have any more social promotion, at least in terms of passing kids on that aren't reading at a third grade level?
Well, the bill is not an absolute retention. The learning loss bill, lays out a plan where if you're in a certain category where you're below or you're not proficient, then you have the capability of going to the summer classes in reading or math to get growth. And all you have to do is show growth in the summer school. And if you do, you can be promoted. If you choose not to go that route and you're in those categories, you could be held back.
It appears that some of the state's efforts that you're considering this week would use $100 million in federal funds, some in COVID relief funds, some the rest in a federal grant. What exactly will this money fund? I'm hearing that there'll be some full-time tutoring courses, some after-school camps, hearing loss, bridge camps, summer learning camps. How's that actually going to work? And is this going to be done beyond just 1 year?
Well, I think we're in store for 2 years. And so those summer camps, you're going to have a test before they come to see where they're at. And then there's a test in the middle of the camp, and there's a test at the end, so you can see if it worked, if they show growth, if there's potential there. And so after 2 years, we'll have a pretty good idea if this is a wise investment to move forward. I think it will be. So we'll see. Also in that bill is a stipend for teachers who want to teach the summer school program where they make additional money on top of what they normally make.
Tennessee Speaker of the House Cameron Sexton is our guest on Inside Politics. We're talking about the special session of the legislature this week and the upcoming 112th Tennessee General Assembly. Back to continue our conversation after this break.